Leave the guns to men. Women belong in the kitchen. Frank sneered, the gun shop bursting with laughter. Kyle whistled, with hands shaking like that a frying pan suits you better. Elena silently stepped to the counter, asking to try a handgun. They laughed louder, ready to film her embarrassment. But seconds later, the shot rang out. The bullet struck bullseye dead center, leaving the entire store stunned. Elena stood there, her plain work jacket hanging loose on her frame, her dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She didn't smile, didn't flinch, didn't look for approval. Her hands were steady, her eyes fixed on the target down range. The room still buzzing with the echo of the shot felt like it had been sucked dry of air. Frank, the shop owner, leaned over the counter, his thick arms crossed, his smirk gone. Kyle and Mason, the two guys lounging near the ammo display, stopped chuckling. Their phones raised to capture what they thought would be a joke, hung frozen in their hands. Nobody expected this. Not from her. Not from the quiet woman in scuffed boots and no makeup who'd walked into their world like she didn't belong. Before that moment, Elena had been standing outside the shop, her breath visible in the cold morning air. She had paused by the glass door, her fingers brushing an old keychain in her pocket, a worn leather strap with a tiny brass bullet charm. It was her dad's, or so her mom had told her when she was a kid. He had died in a car accident when she was 6, and this was all she had left of him. She had been clutching it that morning, standing on the sidewalk, staring at the neon sign that read, Doyle's Firearms. She wasn't here for fun. She wasn't here to prove a point. She was here because she'd found a notebook in her mom's attic last week, filled with her dad's handwriting. Pages of diagrams, angles, wind calculations. It didn't make sense, not fully, but it had brought her here. To this shop, to this moment. The laughter had started the second she stepped inside. Frank, with his graying beard and cowboy hat, had sized her up in one glance. Kyle, lanky and loud, wearing a camo cap backward, had been the first to crack a joke. Mason, broader, with a shiny watch he kept flashing, had piled on. They didn't know her. Didn't know she'd grown up in a house where every word was measured, every step deliberate. Her family's wealth, their name, their power, it was all there, but she'd been taught to keep it hidden. Never flaunt, her mom used to say, her voice sharp as she adjusted Elena's collar. You carry yourself like you're enough, and you will be. So Elena did. Plain clothes, no jewelry, no fuss. But people like Frank, Kyle, and Mason, they saw plain and thought weak. They saw quiet and thought small. Hey, real quick, before we go on, if this story's hitting you, grab your phone, give this video a like, drop a comment below, and hit that subscribe button. It means the world to keep sharing stories like this. Stories that remind us who we really are. All right, let's get back to Elena. Inside the shop, the air smelled of metal and gun oil. The walls were lined with rifles, handguns, and tactical gear gleaming under fluorescent lights. A few other customers, mostly men all older, stood around pretending to browse, but watching the scene unfold. Frank leaned forward, his voice dripping with sarcasm. You sure you're in the right place, sweetheart? This ain't a nail salon. The room chuckled again, a low rumble that made Elena's jaw tighten. She didn't answer, just set her bag on the counter, a simple canvas thing with frayed straps, and repeated her request. I'd like to try a handgun. I have a permit. Her voice was calm, even like she was ordering coffee. Kyle, leaning against a display case, snorted. A permit? What, you borrow it from your boyfriend? Mason laughed, pulling out his phone again. This I gotta record. Go on, girl, show us what you got. The other customers shifted, some smirking, others looking away. Elena unzipped her bag, pulled out a small wallet, and slid her permit across the counter. Frank picked it up, squinted, then tossed it back like it was nothing. All right, fine. Let's humor her. Give her the Glock, 19. Easiest one we got. Don't want her crying when she misses. He handed her the gun, his grin wide, expecting her to fumble. She didn't. Elena checked the weapon with quick, precise movements. Slide magazine safety like she'd done it 100 times. The room went quiet again, the smirks fading. She stepped to the range line, her boots scuffing the worn floor, and raised the gun. Her stance was steady, her grip firm. She fired. The shot cracked through the air, and the target 50 feet away showed a clean hole dead center. A murmur rippled through the shop. Frank's eyebrows shot up. Kyle's phone dipped slightly. Mason muttered, "No way." Elena didn't turn. She fired again. Another bullseye. Then 3 more each shot, landing so close to the first, they almost overlapped. A woman in the crowd, dressed in a flashy red jacket and heavy makeup, stepped forward, her lips curled in a fake smile. "Honey, That's cute, but let's be real, you probably practiced that one shot all week. Her voice was syrupy, but her eyes were sharp cutting. She glanced at Frank for approval, and he nodded, chuckling. Yeah, Lisa's right. One trick doesn't make you a shooter. Step aside, let the real customers have a turn. The crowd murmured some nodding others, watching Elena closely. She didn't flinch. Her fingers brushed the edge of her permit still on the counter, and she looked at Lisa. I'm not done, she said, her voice low but clear. The woman's smile faltered, and the room's energy shifted like a tide pulling back before a wave. The silence broke. Mason, his face red, stepped closer. Beginner's luck. Gotta be. Do it again. His voice had an edge now, like he was trying to convince himself. Kyle nodded, crossing his arms. Yeah, let's see. You keep that up, kitchen girl. Frank, still behind the counter, rubbed his chin, his eyes narrowing. All right, hotshot. That was the easy one. Let's see you handle something real. Try a rifle. Long range, bet you can't even lift it. He jerked his thumb toward a rack of rifles, his tone daring her to fail. Elena set the handgun down, her movements slow and deliberate. She didn't look at Frank, didn't acknowledge the taunts, but her fingers lingered on the counter, brushing that keychain again, the one with the bullet charm. For a second, her eyes flicked to it, and her lips pressed together like she was steadying herself. Then she nodded. Show me the rifle. Frank smirked, pulling down a heavy bolt-action rifle, a Remington 700. This one's a beast. You sure you can handle it? He handed it over, expecting her to stagger under the weight. She didn't. She shouldered it like it was nothing, her hands finding the grip with ease. As Elena adjusted the rifle, a man in a tailored blazer, his hair slicked back and his cologne sharp, leaned over to Kyle and whispered loud enough for everyone to hear. Bet she's just here to impress some guy. Look at her playing tough in that ratty jacket. The crowd snickered, and Kyle grinned, egging him on. Yeah, Derek probably thinks she's in a movie or something. Elena's shoulders stiffened just for a moment, but she didn't turn. She adjusted her stance, her eyes locked on the target. The man Derek kept going, his voice smug. What's next, sweetheart? Gonna cry when you miss. Elena exhaled slowly, her fingers tightening on the rifle, and said, Watch. The single word silenced Derek's next jab, and the crowd leaned in waiting. The range was set up for long distance now, a target at 200 yards. Frank, still playing to the crowd, taped a quarter to the target. Hit that and I'll eat my hat, he said, laughing. Kyle and Mason joined in, their voices louder now, egging each other on. She's gonna miss by a mile, Kyle said, nudging Mason. Bet she drops the gun first. Mason shot back, his phone up again, recording. Elena adjusted her stance, her eyes narrowing as she sighted the target. The room watched, the air thick with anticipation. She exhaled slow and steady and pulled the trigger. The shot echoed and the quarter split clean in half, fell to the ground. A gasp went up. The crowd, now growing as more customers wandered over, buzzed with disbelief. Frank's mouth hung open, his hat still firmly on his head. Kyle's phone was still raised, but his grin was gone. Mason muttered something under his breath, shaking his head. From the back of the shop, a silver-haired man in a faded jacket. Jonas chuckled softly. He'd been there the whole time, leaning against a wall, watching quietly. Now he spoke, his voice low but clear. That's Manuel Torres's style, right there. The way she holds that rifle. You're his granddaughter, aren't you? The room turned to him, then back to Elena. Her eyes widened slightly, but she didn't respond. Elena's hand paused on the rifle, her fingers brushing the stock as Jonas' words sank in. A memory flickered, her mom years ago, slamming a drawer shut when Elena asked about her dad's old gear. Don't touch, that her mom had snapped, her voice sharp with something like fear. Now in the shop, Elena's gaze drifted to the keychain again, and her lips parted just slightly as if a question was forming. But before she could speak, another customer, a wiry guy with a trucker hat and a loud laugh, stepped forward. Granddaughter, come on, old man, you're buying her act. His name tag read Mitch, and his sneer matched Frank's. She's probably some wannabe influencer faking it for clout. The crowd murmured, some nodding, others unsure. Elena's eyes flicked to Mitch, then back to the rifle. She didn't say a word, but her silence felt like a wall. Frank recovered first, his face hardening. Torres, that's a stretch. What's some old guy know about this? He waved Jonas off, but the old man's words hung in the air. Elena set the rifle down, her movements careful, like she was processing something. The crowd murmured, some nodding, others skeptical. Kyle stepped forward, his voice loud again. No way. That shot was staged. The target's probably rigged. Mason nodded, his phone still rolling. Yeah, let's see her do something real. No tricks. Frank, seizing the moment, grinned. All right, princess. Let's make it serious. Military test. Random targets. 2 seconds each. Think you can handle that? Before Elena could respond, a teenage girl near the back, her hair dyed bright blue and her arms crossed, piped up. Why is everyone so obsessed with her? She's just showing off. Her voice was sharp, cutting through the murmurs, and the crowd turned to look. The girl, maybe 16, rolled her eyes. Bet she's never even held a gun before today. Probably paid someone to teach her that trick. Her words stung not just for their cruelty, but for how casually they dismissed Elena's skill. The crowd shifted, some laughing, others nodding. Elena's hand rested on the counter, her fingers still for a moment. Then she looked at the girl and said, I learned from someone better than you'll ever know. The girl's smirk froze and the room felt colder, heavier. Elena's fingers tightened around her bag strap just for a moment. She didn't look at Jonas, didn't look at the crowd, but her eyes flicked to that keychain again and her jaw set. Set it up, she said, her voice quiet but firm. Frank activated the system, a series of silhouettes popping up at random intervals across the range. The crowd watched, some holding their breath, others whispering bets. Elena raised the rifle again, her movements fluid, almost automatic. One by one, the targets appeared, 2 seconds each, some close, some far. She fired 12 times each shot, hitting dead center. The system beeped, signaling the end. The screen flashed 12-12, a new record. The shop erupted. Some clapped, others whispered. Jonas, still in the back, clapped slowly, his eyes bright. That's not just skill, he said loud enough for everyone to hear. That's your father's blood in you. Manuel's daughter. They never told you, did they? Elena froze, her hands still on the rifle. She turned to him, her voice barely above a whisper. My father. The room went quiet again, all eyes on her. Jonas stepped forward, his weathered face soft. He wasn't just some guy in a car accident. He was my friend. A sniper, one of the best. And you're his. As the crowd processed Jonas' words, a burly man with a faded military tattoo on his forearm pushed forward, his voice gruff. This is nonsense. She's no sniper's kid. Look at her, she's barely out of college. He turned to the crowd, his hands spread wide, rallying them. You all falling for this fairy tale? She's just a nobody with a lucky shot. His words hit hard, stirring up murmurs of agreement. Elena's hand paused on the rifle, her fingers curling slightly. She looked at the man, her eyes steady, and said, a nobody doesn't hit 12 out of 12. Her voice was calm, but it carried a weight that made the man's jaw twitch, and the crowd's whispers stopped the silence, sharp and expectant. Frank's laugh cut through the silence, sharp and bitter. This is ridiculous, a sob story. Really? She's playing you all. Kyle smirked, leaning closer to Elena. Yeah, probably watched too many action movies. What's next? You're gonna say you're a secret agent. Mason, still recording, laughed. This is gold. Fake heroin gets exposed. Can't wait to post this. Elena didn't move. Her hands rested on the counter, but her fingers brushed that keychain again, and her eyes glistened for a split second before she blinked it away. She didn't speak, just stood there, letting their words roll off her. Jonas, undeterred, reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, tarnished badge. He set it on the counter in front of her. This was his, your dad's. I promised him I'd give it to his kid one day. He left journals, training notes, everything. You've got his gift? Elena's hand hovered over the badge, then closed around it. Her knuckles whitened as she gripped it, and a single tear slipped down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. The crowd watched, some shifting uncomfortably, others staring in awe. Frank's smirk faltered. Kyle looked away. Mason's phone lowered slightly, his bravado fading. Elena's grip on the badge loosened, and she slipped it into her pocket next to the keychain. A memory surfaced, her mom, years ago, standing in their old garage, staring at a locked metal box. That's your dad's, she'd said, her voice tight before turning away. Now in the shop, Elena's eyes lingered on the counter, her fingers tracing its edge. A woman in the crowd, older with a scarf tied tight around her neck, spoke up. You're just milking this for attention, she said, her voice cold. Stop pretending you're some lost princess. The crowd murmured, some agreeing, others unsure. Elena's lips pressed together, but she didn't respond. Instead, she picked up her bag, her movements slow, deliberate, like she was holding something back. As Elena turned back to the range, a middle-aged man in a pressed polo shirt, his glasses slipping down his nose, stepped forward, his voice dripping with condescension. You know, it's not just about shooting. You don't belong here. Look at you, no class, no style. He gestured at her jacket, his lip curling. This is a man's world, honey. You're out of your league. The crowd chuckled some nodding, feeding off his arrogance. Elena's hand paused on her bag, her fingers brushing the frayed strap. She looked at him, her gaze unflinching, and said, "Skill doesn't need style." The man's glasses slipped further, and he fumbled to push them up, the crowd's laughter fading into an uneasy hush. Frank, sensing the crowd's doubt, seized the moment. "All right, fine. You're good. But if you're really something special, let's see the impossible." 2 panes of bulletproof glass angled 100 yards out. Hit the bullseye through both. Nobody's done it. Kyle laughed, sensing blood in the water. "Yeah, go on, legend. Let's see you choke." Mason raised his phone again, grinning. "This is the one that'll go viral." Elena looked at the glass panels Frank was setting up, her face unreadable. She picked up the rifle, checked it, and nodded. "All right." As Frank adjusted the glass, a young guy in a leather jacket, his earbuds dangling, leaned over to Mason. "Bet she's shaking inside," he said, loud enough for Elena to hear. "All this pressure. She's gonna crack." His smirk was wide, his eyes gleaming with malice. The crowd chuckled, feeding off his energy. Elena's hand paused on the rifle, her fingers steady but her shoulders tensing for a split second. She looked at the guy, her gaze calm but piercing. "Pressure's nothing new," she said, her voice soft but sharp enough to cut through the laughter. The guy's smirk faded and the crowd's chuckles died out, replaced by a heavy silence. The shop went silent again, the tension so thick it felt like the air was pressing down. Elena stepped to the line, her boots steady on the floor. She raised the rifle, her eyes narrowing as she sighted through the glass. The first pane was angled left, the second right, the target barely visible through the distortion. She exhaled, her breath slow and even, and fired. The shot rang out, the bullet slicing through both panes and burying itself dead center in the target. Smoke curled from the barrel. The crowd exploded, cheers, gasps, a few curses. Frank stood frozen, his face pale. Kyle's mouth hung open. Mason's phone dropped to his side. Before the cheers could settle, a woman in a sleek blazer, her nails painted bright red, stepped forward, her voice sharp and mocking. "Okay, so you can shoot. Big deal. Doesn't mean you're anybody." She flipped her hair, glancing at the crowd for support. "You're still just some girl in a cheap jacket trying too hard." Her words cut deep, and the crowd murmured, some nodding, others shifting uncomfortably. Elena's hand rested on the rifle, her fingers still. She looked at the woman, her eyes calm but burning with something unspoken. "I'm not trying," she said, her voice steady. "I'm doing—" The woman's face flushed, and the crowd's murmurs stopped, the air heavy with anticipation. Jonas stepped forward, his smile wide. "You didn't just match your father. You passed him. A new legend's born today." Elena set the rifle down, her movements slow, deliberate. She looked at Jonas, then at the badge in her hand. "I didn't come here to prove anything to you," she said, her voice steady, cutting through the noise. "I came to remind everyone, talent doesn't care about gender." The words landed like a punch, silencing the room. Even Frank didn't have a comeback. The door swung open and a hush fell over the shop. A man in a tailored coat, his presence quiet but commanding, stepped inside. His eyes scanned the room, landing on Elena. The crowd parted, some stepping back instinctively. Frank's hands dropped to his sides, his bravado gone. Kyle shifted uncomfortably, his cap pulled low. Mason's phone was now in his pocket, his face pale. The man didn't speak, just walked to Elena's side and placed a hand on her shoulder. She looked up at him, her face softening for the first time. "Ready?" he asked, his voice low. She nodded, and the room felt smaller, like the walls themselves were bowing to them. Elena zipped her bag, her movement steady, and turned to leave. The crowd watched, some whispering, others staring in silence. A man in the back, his face weathered and his hands calloused, muttered to his friend. "She's somebody, isn't she?" His friend nodded, eyes wide. "Yeah, and they didn't see it coming." Elena didn't hear them. She was already at the door, her husband beside her, the badge and keychain tucked safely in her pocket. The shop's neon sign flickered as they stepped outside, the cold air hitting her face. She didn't look back. Didn't need to. As they walked away, a young woman in a hoodie who'd been silent the whole time slipped out of the crowd and followed them to the sidewalk. She hesitated, then called out, "Hey, wait!" Elena turned, her expression calm but curious. The woman's hands twisted together, her voice shaky. I saw what you did in there. I've been told I don't belong my whole life. How do you keep going?" The crowd inside was still buzzing, but out here, it was just the three of them. Elena looked at her, then pulled the keychain from her pocket and held it out. "You carry what matters," she said softly, "and you don't stop." The woman nodded, tears in her eyes, as Elena turned and walked on. The video Mason posted didn't go the way he'd planned. It spread like wildfire, but not to mock Elena. It was her shots, her calm, her final words that people shared. Comments poured in. "She's unreal. Who is she? This is what strength looks like." The clip of her splitting the coin, then the glass racked up millions of views. Frank's shop took a hit. Online reviews tore into him, calling him out for his attitude. He was let go from his own business a month later, the owner citing reputational damage. Kyle lost his sponsorship with a local hunting brand after his comments in the video surfaced. Mason's social media accounts were flooded with criticism, his followers dropping him like a bad habit. Elena didn't see any of it. She was already somewhere else, sitting in a quiet room with Jonas flipping through her father's journals. Page after page of his handwriting notes on wind distance breathing, a life she'd never known. She traced the words with her finger, her face still, but her eyes alive with something new. The military reached out a week later, offering her a role as an honorary instructor. She accepted not for the title, but for the chance to carry her father's work forward. Jonas handed over the rest of the legacy medals, letters, a history she was only beginning to understand. A month later, Elena stood in a training field, her boots sinking into the grass as she adjusted a rifle for a young recruit. The kid, nervous but eager, watched her every move. "Like this?" he asked, mimicking her stance. She nodded, her voice calm. "Exactly. Now breathe." The recruit fired, hitting the target clean. He grinned, and Elena gave him a small nod, her eyes catching the glint of her father's badge now pinned to her jacket. The wind carried the sound of distant shots, and for a moment she paused, her hand brushing the keychain in her pocket. It felt heavier now, like it carried more than just memory. She didn't go back to the shop. Didn't need to. The truth was out there in every view, every comment, every share. She'd walked in as a stranger, judged for her clothes, her quiet, her gender. She walked out as herself, seen for who she was. And the world noticed. Her silence, her skill, her grace, it spoke louder than any argument could. She didn't need to shout. She didn't need to explain. She just kept moving, her father's badge in her pocket, her husband's hand at her side. Sometimes late at night she'd pull out that keychain, the one with the bullet charm. She'd hold it, turning it over in her hands, the leather worn smooth from years of touch. It wasn't just a memory now, it was a promise kept, a truth uncovered. She wasn't alone in that shop, and neither are you watching this. You've felt those looks, those words that wait. You've carried it quiet, strong, waiting for the moment the world sees you. And it will. Where are you watching from? Leave a comment below and hit follow to walk with me through heartbreak, betrayal, and finally healing.